Hello friends and students. I'm back after my little holiday break and I'm going to begin. Actually, I have 3 paintings, beach scenes, that I'm going to be completing in the next number of sessions. And as I do, I'm going to just give you a little refresher on the way I lay out my palette. This is just a palette pad, just paper. Sometimes I use a glass piece with white backing, and it cleans off pretty easily, but I'm bad about not cleaning it off right away, so glass is not always the best option, but it is a good one. And if you're going to use a piece of glass, make sure that you put masking tape around the edges so you don't cut yourself when you're moving it about. Now this is the way I lay out my palette. These are standard colors, and I just realized I didn't find my cadmium red light, but I will get it. It's a little more toward the orange. But I lay out my palette this way because I have my warmer colors on this side, then I have my cooler colors on this side, and the white in the corner here. I usually squeeze out a little more white because I use white typically more than I do the other colors. Now the amount of color that you put on your palette is really kind of a personal preference, but I don't put out more than I think I'm going to use in one session. But I do put them all out from the beginning because it's always good to be able to just reach over and touch a warmer color to warm up my paint or to cool it down. So either way, I have it here for me. One little point about applying the paint to the palette. You notice I've made sort of blobs, if you will. That keeps your paint from drying out as fast. And just to give you a little idea, I hold the tip right down on the paper and squeeze while I'm holding it against the paper pad so that it will sort of bunch up as opposed to spreading out. When I'm finished with the color for the day, I put it in an airtight box, which keeps my paint, especially oil paint, keeps it from drying out. But when you go back the second or third day, especially if it's been a few days in between, then you might be able to salvage your paint by simply lifting up on each little portion of paint and then pulling out the moist paint from underneath. That's just kind of a good rule of thumb. And these are the colors that I use on my palette. And beginning over here, I have Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray is a wonderful color because you can mix greens from it, and by adding some red to your greens, you can also make a variety of shades of brown, and then you add a little yellow to that, which also changes the colors. Then I have here Sap Green, which is probably my favorite green, and so I use a good bit of it. Now this is Viridian Green, which is a cooler green. It's a little more blue. And this is Cobalt Blue, Prussian Blue. This is Titanium White, which I prefer over, there's also Zinc White, which is a little cooler white, which I don't really care for that as much. But again, it's kind of personal preference. Then this is Cadmium Yellow Light, Cadmium Yellow Medium, and here would be Cadmium Red Light, which is an orange red, and then here we have Cadmium Red Medium. This is alizarin crimson, another staple. I love alizarin and Prussian blue. Those are my two favorite colors. And this is burnt sienna, which is a good brown color, but you don't need to buy that if you don't already have it. And the same is true for sap green. If you don't have them, you can mix them from other colors. And a lot of this comes with experience from just simply experimenting. Now, in terms of the brand of oil paint, you'll find many artists have certain brands they swear by. They don't use anything else. I have a variety. I have Liquitex, I have Winsor & Newton, I have Grumbacher, and I think those are, well, I have also, well, this is Grumbacher too, but I like them all. On occasion, I get a tube that's not as good as the rest, but for the most part, this is a good beginning palette for those of you, especially who are beginners. And over time, you'll develop your own style for mixing color. You'll find your favorites. Some of these paints are more translucent. Some are more opaque, and you'll kind of find that out as you go along too. Now, I use as a thinning medium, I use Liquin, which is made by Winsor & Newton. It's called Liquin Original, and it's for speeding up the drying. It also gives a little bit of a gloss to your paint, which I like. Now, I use odorless turpentine, which I typically keep in a jar. And I buy those plastic pot scrubbers, and you need to make sure they're plastic, and put those in the bottom of the jar so that I have something to brush the paint off of my brush. And it also collects the sediment in the bottom. So if I wanted to change this jar, I would very carefully pour this off while the sediment is still in the bottom. And then I can just throw away this pot scrubber. But those are just some need-to-know things. And I always keep a roll of paper towels nearby, and a cloth as well. Now, I have thousands of brushes, and I don't think that's an exaggeration, but I do have my favorites, and from time to time I'll mention what I'm using just for your information. So let's get started. I'm not going to talk too much about mixing color because I've done that in the past, so please refer back to some of my other tutorials. But this is oil paint. I also use acrylics, especially for beach scenes, but I like the variety that I can get with oil paint that I can't with acrylics. So let's paint. And by the way, I take some of this liquid and I just pour it out someplace on my tablet. Now, if you have a little plastic container or even the lid to a jar that you're not going to be using again because it will dry up and you'll never be able to use it again, you have to throw it out. But I just put the smallest amount, and let me see if I can show you. And by the way, opening paint tubes, you almost have to have a handy pair of pliers nearby. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. Now I'm having, oops, there we go. Had some difficulty. Let me just put this over here. Now I don't put out very much at a time because it will dry rather quickly. Not usually during my painting session, but I'm not always sure how much of it I'm going to use. You can also use your odorless turpentine for thinning your paints, but I don't recommend it, because what happens when you put your brush into your turpentine is that the paint dissipates into the turpentine, so that when you start to mix with something else, then it dilutes, or what's the word for it? It contaminates your other colors. So this is far better to use as your medium if you need something to thin your paints out to make them more transparent. Okay, so we're off.